Guys, good morning. It's Daryl here. Happy Friday. It is 5:30 a.m. here in Connecticut on the East Coast. I've actually really interrupted my time for working out right now because I have some stuff that I really like to talk about. In the title of this video, I'm not going to be able to put what I actually want to put. Um, the court case concerning the last case of racism in Georgia. There's been testimony as to what the defendants said as the black man lay dying. And I'm being careful not to use specific names right now in this video because I'll actually lose monetization if I do. And I thought about that word, those words, those racist words. And I want to talk about how I grew up. Because I started to think about, for me, it's not something I say. And it's not because I have to consciously try not to say it. Let me explain. I grew up in the 70s. I was born in 66. I grew up in the 70s. My father was the park ranger, the head guy. We lived in the state house. He ran the crew for a state park here in Connecticut. Back in those days, they also had people from the prison system coming in and working to build trails. They could volunteer to do environmental work, and my father would run the crews that came from the prisons. I went on patrol with my father from fishing game to being more or less a game warden to moving kids along that were partying. And I always saw respect from the kids. My father, at that time, he was probably around 30. He died when he was 32. I was 9 years old. And he always got a lot of respect from all the white or black. I remember he used to love Ike and Tina Turner, the Beatles. I remember him giving the peace sign. I remember his brothers, my uncles, busting his ass because he had that hippie aura about him. He was a beefy boxing, hunting, and fishing type of guy that collected guns. Make no mistake, but he was definitely of that generation. My mom grew up. She was French, hardcore French and Native American, Canadian French. She didn't even speak English. She was picked on constantly because of her nationality, because of being Native American and Canadian French, and having the accent and talking different. She was a very pretty girl when she was younger, and I used to hear from my aunts and my father how she was picked on because a lot of the boys, she got all the attention from all the boys. They didn't like the French Canadian, the Native American girls, because the boys gave them all the attention. Okay, in my house, that's a rough idea of my home. There wasn't racism in my house. I didn't know the word we'll call it the N-word. I didn't know it. I didn't know what it meant. I had never even heard it. I'm kind of ashamed about a few other things. Growing up out in the forest like this, in these smaller towns out here, I honestly wasn't familiar with other races, and I'm embarrassed. I'm truly embarrassed to say this, but I've always told you guys, I'll be honest. And I know that there's a lot of other people out there like me. So even when I'm worried about being too honest, I know that other people feel or have experienced the same thing I have. I remember being in line in a store when I was a very young kid, 3 or 4, and I had never seen a black person before. And I remember asking the black lady, like I said, I feel terrible, but I can't remember how I asked her, but I thought how people have moles, like dark-skinned moles. I thought it had spread and that it was a mole. Like her coloring was like from a mole changing the rest of the skin. I apologize if this offends anybody. I was just a 3-year-old kid. And the lady explained to me, she laughed. And my mom grabbed me. And my mom was upset that I would say something like that, even though, I was only 3 or 4. And the black lady was so kind to me. And I remember her looking in my face, and I saw her kind eyes. And she explained, I forgot the word she used. I don't know if she actually said she was a colored person at that time, if she used that phrase. But she was so nice to me. And she explained to me how where she grew up, that was the color of the people where she grew up. I forgot, like I said, this is 50 years ago, and I forgot how she explained it to me. But I'm embarrassed. But I was only 3 years old. So in my house, that word was never used. It's not like we hid it or anything. It wasn't used. My father had a very liberal attitude. Despite being a boxer, a hunter, a gun collector, his attitude towards people was just all people are equal. I remember that, and that's probably where I get it now. This attitude. My mom was the same way, but she was a little more quieter. Having come from up near the Canadian border, she was I don't want to say timid, but I think it scared her just to talk about race at all. So this word never came up in my household. Let me tell you about another thing. Like I said, my dad was the park ranger, and I remember my mom talking. I remember him talking to all of his people, his guys, his employees, the crew that he ran, the state employees that he ran that would do the work, build the changing rooms, build the lifeguard towers, build everything. And there were certain times when they would make sure, as I got older, like 4, 5, 6, they would let me ride my bicycle around the park. And there was times when I was not allowed to go to the park. There were things happening there. I remember hearing the term streaker. It's the streakers. I don't know if younger people know what that is, but it's a funny memory. People would strip down and run across a group of people naked. And it happened a lot. It's kind of funny to see a person jiggling and bouncing across or running like mad through a group of people. Yeah. So I would, there's times like that I was ordered to stay home and stay away from the park. And another time, this is what I want to talk about, there were riots. I heard the term race riots. This would be at the beach area. There was the camping area, the big field. And then there was a large lake with a beach. And on top of that, there was the concession area, a large parking lot, a large picnic area, and that's where everybody would gather. As I got older, in my high school years, we used to have kegs in that area. But back in the early 70s, apparently there were race riots. And my father would have to go in and quell the situation. And I can't tell you a lot about that because I was only 4, 5, 6 years old, and I was ordered to stay far away from it. I can tell you this. My father never came home hurt or injured or upset. The way when I saw him come back from those days, come back from the days when there were these race riots that I heard these words, I never saw him injured. I'm going to make a point to talk to my relatives in the next coming days just to make sure, because from everything I saw, my dad must have handled it well because he came back home unmarred, and and no, he was not the type to use. He would not use force against people. He would be more than happy to use force to protect his family, to guard his house and to protect his family. He taught me to box and he kept a loaded gun in the house. But when it came to that situation with people expressing their ideas, and especially the fact that he was more or less a hippie that kind of had aged out. He was a little older than the hippie of that day, and he was made fun of for that. But I think that's the reason that he was so able to handle these situations at the park. That he was he was compassionate. He was a big man. He was a solid, no nonsense man, but he was very compassionate. And so that's just a brief idea of how I grew up. But the main thing here is I heard about this Georgia case today and what supposedly was uttered as the jogger lay dying. And I thought about that word, that racial epithet. And I tried to, and I thought about how it must just be like a common occurrence in that household, in that the men that have been arrested there. And then I thought about my home. And like I said, it's not like there was a point not to say it or getting in trouble if it was said. It didn't exist. It honestly did not exist. I remember my dad listening to Cheech and Chong, and I remember him cracking up. But he loved those guys. Carlos Santana was another one of his favorite. I remember listening to his 8-tracks, laying on the floor on hot summer days with the fan in front of me. And I'd put different 8-tracks in and listen to Carlos Santana and Ike and Tina Turner, the Stones, the Beatles. But I guess I consider myself lucky that I grew up in a house without hatred, without that prejudice. And I truly feel sorry. I feel bad for the people that did grow up in homes filled with prejudice and misconceptions and hatred. I truly do feel sorry for those people that grew up as children like that. But hopefully, people change and we can all learn. All right. You guys have a good Friday.